August 26, 1994. Before most of America had finished its first cup of coffee, nearly $500,000 tried to leave the U.S. banking system without anyone's permission. Two FBI agents were already racing through the quiet streets of San Francisco, not toward a robbery in progress, but toward something far more unsettling, a perfectly legal transaction that should not have existed. Inside a downtown bank branch, a woman with a Russian accent stood calmly at the counter, requesting a massive cash withdrawal. Her paperwork was flawless. The account was real. The signature matched. Nothing was wrong except the fact that Citibank had never authorized the transfer. At that exact same moment, similar withdrawals were unfolding in Israel, Argentina, and across Europe, each tied to the same source, each moving hundreds of thousands of US dollars, each executed without forced threats or alarms. This wasn't a bank robbery in the traditional sense. No masks, no guns, no panic. The money was leaving as if the bank itself had approved it, as if the system believed the thief belonged there. When the FBI finally entered the San Francisco branch, they weren't stopping a crime, they were interrupting a machine that had already decided to cooperate. What investigators were about to uncover would expose a terrifying truth about the early digital age. The world's largest financial institutions weren't protected by unbreakable code, but by fragile assumptions, blind trust, and systems that had never imagined an enemy who didn't need to break in. This is the story of the first cyber bank heist in history, a crime that didn't shatter glass or trigger alarms, but quietly rewrote the rules of money, identity, and power forever. In 1994, the world still believed that banks were fortresses, not because they were impenetrable, but because no one had seriously tried to challenge them from the inside. Cybersecurity as a concept barely existed. Firewalls were primitive, intrusion detection was rare, and the dominant defense strategy of global financial institutions rested on a single dangerously naive assumption: if someone was inside the network, they must belong there. Citibank was no exception. Its global operations relied on X25, a pre-internet data network designed in an era when speed and reliability mattered far more than suspicion. The system was efficient, expensive, and trusted implicitly. Trust was built into the architecture itself. There were no hard borders, only soft permissions inherited from a time when networks were meant to connect partners, not repel adversaries. Thousands of miles away in St. Petersburg, a small group of young hackers stumbled upon something that should never have been public. An underground hacker magazine called Frack, part Manifesto, part Technical Journal, released an issue that listed access points to major global networks. Buried among them was Citibank. No physical location, no regional identifier, just a presence exposed and undefined. To the hackers, this wasn't a target yet. It was a question. When they explored it, what they found was worse than a single vulnerability. Inside Citibank's internal systems, access controls were loose, segmentation was minimal, and internal communications flowed freely. Hackers could see other users message internally and move laterally without resistance. It felt less like breaking into a vault and more like wandering into an office after hours where the doors had been left unlocked. Then came the discovery that changed everything: internal emails containing valid login credentials for financial transfer terminals, not encrypted vault keys, not cracked passwords, plain credentials circulating inside a system that assumed no one uninvited would ever read them. At that moment, the hackers understood something terrifying. Citibank hadn't been protected by technology. It had been protected by belief. Belief that no outsider would ever reach this far. Belief that trust was safer than verification. And belief, once exposed, becomes the most dangerous vulnerability of all. At first, the hackers didn't touch the money. What they had discovered inside Citibank's network felt less like a weapon and more like forbidden knowledge. Access to financial transfer terminals meant power, but it also meant visibility, and visibility meant consequences. They understood that the moment money moved, the system would wake up. For weeks, the access remained unused, studied quietly, almost reverently. But knowledge has weight, and weight becomes pressure. One member of the group began to feel it more than the others. Curiosity gave way to temptation, and temptation turned into rationalization. He didn't want to be the one who triggered the alarm, but he couldn't ignore what the access represented. The solution in his mind was simple: if he didn't use it himself, someone else could. That decision marked the point of no return. Through underground contacts, he was introduced to Vladimir Levin, A man who didn't speak the language of exploits or code, but understood ambition, leverage, and risk. Levin wasn't impressed by the elegance of the access. He was interested in what it could buy. The hacker sold everything: credentials, network paths, and procedural details for $100. The amount was trivial. The consequences were not. Levin didn't need to break Citibank's defenses because the system already trusted him the moment he logged in. Late at night, while bank employees slept and transaction logs blended into background noise, Levin typed commands that looked indistinguishable from routine internal operations. No alarms sounded. No safeguards engaged. The system responded the only way it knew how: with obedience. In that silence, Levin realized something the hackers hadn't fully embraced. This wasn't about hacking technology. It was about impersonating authority. He wasn't stealing from the bank. He was acting as the bank. And once that realization took hold, the crime ceased to be theoretical. The line between access and action had been crossed, and with it, the quiet experiment transformed into a global financial threat that could no longer be contained. Once the first transfer succeeded, the crime changed shape. What had been an experiment became momentum, and momentum demands infrastructure. Digital money could move invisibly across networks, but it still had to surface somewhere, still had to be touched, counted, and carried away. Levin understood this immediately. The weakness was no longer the bank, it was the human endpoint. To solve that problem, he turned to people who specialized in vanishing money and vanishing themselves: the Tambov Organized Crime Group. Their role was brutally simple: open accounts, ask no questions, withdraw cash, walk away. The elegance of the plan was its banality. No forged documents, no threats, no violence, just routine banking executed at the wrong scale at the wrong time by the wrong people. The first withdrawals felt unreal. Hundreds of thousands of US dollars moved from legitimate corporate accounts into newly opened ones, then disappeared within minutes. Finland, Argentina, Israel. The United States. Each location added confidence, each success reinforcing the illusion that the system was blind. Levin began to escalate. The sums grew larger. The timing became bolder. What he didn't realize was that the system wasn't blind anymore. It was watching. Inside Citibank, security teams could see the transactions, but they couldn't explain them. Every check passed. Every rule was followed. The fraud didn't look like fraud. And that terrified them. So Citibank made a decision that would define the case. Instead of shutting everything down, they allowed the next transfer to proceed, not to protect money, but to expose a human being. It was a calculated risk, a digital sting operation designed to force the invisible into the physical world. As new transfers were initiated, the FBI coordinated with banks and law enforcement agencies across continents, waiting for the moment when digital certainty would require a living body at a teller window. In San Francisco, a woman was stalled just long enough for agents to arrive. In Israel, an undercover team waited at opening time, watching every customer who walked through the door. In Argentina, a suspect sensed something was wrong and vanished seconds before police arrived. Each near miss tightened the net. Each arrest revealed another fragment of the structure. Meanwhile, Levin felt the pressure building. The Tambov group wanted results, not explanations. Law enforcement wanted names, not theories. Every successful withdrawal pushed him higher, but every delay pulled him closer to collapse. The crime was no longer quiet. It was global, synchronized, and accelerating, and Levin was standing at the center of it, trying to outrun consequences that were already moving faster than he was. By the time the investigation reached its critical phase, the FBI understood that code was no longer the battlefield. The transfers had proven that technology alone wouldn't reveal the truth. Every digital trail led back to legitimate credentials, approved systems and procedures that appeared flawless on paper. There was nothing left to hack, nothing left to trace. So investigators shifted focus to the only element that still behaved unpredictably: people. The first arrest in San Francisco didn't deliver a mastermind, but it cracked something far more valuable. The woman taken into custody wasn't a criminal architect. She was a courier, a participant who had been placed at the edge of a plan she didn't fully understand. In the sterile quiet of an interrogation room, fear replaced loyalty. She spoke not out of strategy, but out of betrayal, realizing that she had been exposed while the person directing her actions had already fled. That realization became the lever the FBI needed. Rather than threaten or coerce, agents applied pressure through truth. They made it clear that she was disposable to the people she was protecting. Slowly, the silence broke. Phone numbers surfaced. Names followed. Then came the calls. What began as controlled communication turned into a psychological unraveling. A three-way phone call was arranged, one side believing it was speaking in confidence, unaware that every word was being captured. On the line, Vladimir Levin grew comfortable. He explained. He justified. He filled in the gaps investigators had struggled to see. The crime unraveled not because of a technical failure, but because of human arrogance. At the same time, forces outside the FBI were closing in. The Tambov group, growing suspicious of delays and failed withdrawals, began applying pressure of its own. In Russia, authorities investigating organized crime intercepted communications and quietly added Levin to their radar. The walls closed from every direction. What had once felt like control now felt like entrapment. Levin was no longer exploiting the system. He was trapped inside it, caught between law enforcement demanding cooperation and criminals demanding results. The illusion of mastery collapsed, replaced by the realization that the same trust he had abused was now gone. And without trust, the entire structure he had built began to fold in on itself. By early 1995, escape had replaced ambition as Vladimir Levin's only remaining objective. The system that once treated him as an insider was now closing ranks, and every delay, every failed withdrawal increased the risk that his name would surface in the wrong hands. On March 3, 1995, Levin boarded a flight from St. Petersburg to London, carrying no stolen cash and no illusions of victory, only the hope that distance might buy him time. It didn't. When the plane touched down at London Stansted Airport, 3 British police officers were waiting. There was no chase, no confrontation. No dramatic resistance, just the quiet end of a man who had outrun the system for far longer than anyone thought possible. Levin would spend the next 30 months in a British prison before being extradited to the United States, where investigators finally pieced together how the crime had unfolded. What emerged was not the profile of a brilliant hacker, but something far more unsettling. Levin hadn't defeated Citibank's technology. He had exploited its confidence. He used legitimate machines, ordinary office computers, and authorized credentials, even dialing into Citibank's network from systems owned by a small Russian software company where he worked. Nothing about the setup looked criminal from the outside. That realization was deeply uncomfortable for investigators. It meant that the bank hadn't been breached by force or ingenuity, but by trust misplaced at scale. Levin's sentence felt strangely inadequate compared to the magnitude of the damage, not only financial, but psychological. A global bank had been made to obey someone who never should have been there. The arrest closed the case, but it didn't restore certainty. If anything, it left behind a more troubling question: if someone like Levin could do this without extraordinary skill, how many others could follow the same path once the illusion of safety was gone? Vladimir Levin walked out of prison in 1998, but his story didn't end, it dissolved. He traveled through Eastern Europe, surfaced briefly in the Czech Republic, and then vanished without explanation. No confirmed sightings, no official death record. Only fragments, rumors of missing money, whispers of betrayal, and theories that range from murder to reinvention under a new identity. The disappearance felt fitting, almost symbolic. The man who had moved invisibly through the world's largest banking systems now disappeared into the same global shadows he once exploited. Years later, the case resurfaced in an unexpected place, an anonymous post on a Russian hacking forum. The author claimed to be one of the original hackers who had first accessed Citibank's network. He wrote that Levin wasn't the architect of the breach, only the buyer of an opportunity, and that the real technical work had been done by a small, scattered group whose names were never recorded. Whether the post was truth exaggeration or misdirection remains unknown, but its message resonated because it aligned with what the case had already revealed. The Citibank hack was never about a single criminal or a single flaw. It was about systems built on assumption rather than verification, about institutions that confused familiarity with security. After this case, the financial world changed quietly but permanently. Passwords were no longer casual. Internal access was no longer trusted by default. Cybersecurity became a discipline born not from innovation, but from embarrassment. Yet the most enduring impact wasn't technical, it was psychological. The case forced organizations and individuals to confront an uncomfortable reality. Authority can be impersonated. Trust can be weaponized, and the greatest risks often come from places that look legitimate. The first cyberbank heist didn't just expose a weakness in banking infrastructure. It exposed a weakness in human thinking. And decades later, as digital systems continue to shape identity, money, and power, the lesson remains unchanged. The most dangerous threats are rarely the ones that crash through the door. They are the ones that walk in unchallenged because everyone assumes they belong. This story isn't really about Citibank or hackers or the 1990s. It's about a pattern that still defines our world today. Systems don't usually fail because of brilliant attacks, they fail because of unchallenged trust routine and the belief that this is how it's always worked. The first cyberbank heist proved that legitimacy can be faked, authority can be borrowed, and complacency is often the real vulnerability. In an age where our money identities and lives are increasingly digital, that lesson matters more than ever. If this story made you think, hit like. If you believe others should hear it, share it. And if you want more deep investigative stories like this, subscribe, because understanding the system is the first step to not being controlled by it.